Welcome to Fruity Knitting. I'm Madeline.
And I'm Andrea, and this is episode 113.
Fruity Knitting is a 90-minute program filled with knitting inspiration from around the world, as well as some extra snippets of travel, history and storytelling that we hope adds joy to your life and brings a smile to your face.
Very good.
Thank you.
So back in episode 112, our feature interview was with Pernilla, who shared the amazing story behind the development of Bohus Stickning, and we're going to continue on with that story in this episode as well. So just to recap for you, the Bohus Stickning brand started in the 1930s to provide an income for poor families in the Bohuslän area of Sweden. And then over the next 30 years, the brand became known worldwide for its exquisitely beautiful high fashion designs. And then Bohus Stickning closed in the late 60s, but it had a major revival in the 90s. So in the interview today, we cover the 90s revival. Pernilla shows us some more Bohus Stickning designs and gives us some really great technical advice on how to knit Bohus Stickning. But the majority of the interview is all about Pernilla's Angora rabbits, because Pernilla and her husband farm around 250 Angora rabbits for their wool, which is then blended together with superfine merino wool to make the very special Bohus Stickning yarns. And Pernilla clips the rabbit's wool herself with scissors, and you're going to see footage of her doing that. And she's quite the expert on all the special qualities of Angora wool and how to knit with it. So I think it's a really good follow-on interview from the previous one. And I think it's just wonderful that we can learn more about the wool from Angora rabbits, because we haven't had that on the show before.
Yep. Mum's actually knitting one of the Bohus Stickning designs herself, the apples design.
Very exciting.
Yeah. So in our Meet the Shepherdess segment, we featured Tammy from Wing and a Prayer Farm. And Tammy's farm is the kind of farm you'll find in classic children's books like Charlotte's Web, for example. It has a wonderfully diverse selection of animals. Tammy has pigs, ducks, chickens, goats, alpacas, and about 10 different breeds of sheep. And she creates her own unique blends of yarn from all her fibre animals, and then naturally dyes the fibre from plants of her very own garden.
Yeah, I know. She does so much. And she's also doing a really special breeding up program on Valais black-nosed sheep, which is fascinating to hear about. So on top of all of that, we have updates on our own projects, and there's a little segment on invisible mending that we hope you really enjoy. So I think we'll start off with you, Madeline.
So now we're up to under construction. Last episode, I showed you the mittens by Sophia Kammerborn that I've been working on. The pattern is called Shine. This is it. And I've been using these two DK weight yarns for it, which I think look very lovely together. As you know from last episode, I've been working on loosening my gauge, mainly by switching to a larger size needle. And I'm happy to say they're finally at the recommended gauge. So I've never knitted mittens before. So when I reached up to about here, I then started to worry that actually they would be too loose and too wide, because I thought they were supposed to sit fairly tightly. But Mum assured me that's not the case. And Mum's got slightly smaller hands than me, but when I wear them, they do fit me very well. So she was right. And now the challenge is to knit the second mitten at the same gauge, because when I ripped out a lot of it, I ripped up to about here. So that means everything underneath is still in the really tight gauge. And I didn't think of that when I started the second mitten. So I knitted it too loosely at the cuff, and then I had to rip it all apart again. So I've been doing a lot of ripping apart for the fact that I said it's a fairly easy pattern.
Yeah. Well, it is, but you're not knitting on it that often. And like you said, with the gauge, that was really important. But actually, I think you can tell that the cuff here is sitting tight, but I think that's good, because it means that you won't have to mess around with your coat, because it's really annoying having to mess around with coats and cuffs and make sure that they're sort of sitting flat underneath. So I think that's going to work really well.
Yeah, hope so.
And you also did a few less stitches here, didn't you?
That's true, yeah, because I can't remember exactly how many stitches you're supposed to pick up, but I think we subtracted it by 4, and now it just sits a bit more tightly, and I don't need to wiggle my thumb that much. So.
It's looking very beautiful though.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's really gorgeous. So I did say it was easy. In principle it is, but there was one more thing I had to watch out for. Basically, when you knit this pattern around here, you knit it on 5 double-pointed knitting needles, and when you finish knitting all the stitches off one needle and switch to a new one, you need to make sure to knit that first stitch slightly tighter than the rest, otherwise the last stitch on the previous needle will be too loose. And I had no problem doing that when I was knitting super tightly anyway. But then once I made the effort to loosen my gauge, I ended up with this vertical column of bubbly, bulky stitches. It didn't look very nice. Mum recommended that I unpick it, but I'm not sure that I did.
I don't think you did.
I did so much unpicking. But Mum also showed me a different way to avoid this problem, which I really, really like. So basically, when you finish knitting all of the stitches onto your new needle, you knit one more stitch off the upcoming needle as well, and you do that for all the following needles to come. And that means that you avoid switching needles at the same spot every single row, and you don't get that vertical column of bulky stitches.
Yes. Yeah.
That's worked well for me. I haven't been working on the mittens every single day, so it is taking me a bit longer. I'm hoping that I'll have these mittens finished by the end of this week or maybe next week. So it'll definitely be finished by next episode.
Sophia has such lovely patterns.
She has very pretty patterns.
Very charming.
Last year she published 2 gorgeous sock designs which look like they belong in a classic children's book. Here's a picture of them. And the socks on the left have little owls. They're called ugla socks. And the ones on the right have ladybugs, and they are called wish socks. So Sophia is kindly offering Fruity Knitting patrons a 25% discount off all her self-published patterns in her Ravelry store. Apart from those gorgeous socks designs, she also has lots of cute mittens, hats, cowls, and also a colourwork yoke Lopi cardigan. And they all have a very charming Scandinavian feel to them.
Yes. I've just noticed how colourful we look together.
That's true.
You're wearing your smarty dress.
Yeah, they're actually macarons. We got this in quite a few years ago. It was a very generous birthday gift by Mum in Paris. We got it from a Parisian boutique with macarons on it.
Yeah, I think we were with Uma.
Yeah, it was a weekend trip, I think.
Yeah, so my mum was with us, and I think we spent 4 days in Paris.
Yeah.
I got a pretty dress, and you did too.
Yeah. You've worn your dress heaps of times on the podcast.
I have too.
The one with the tulips, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
Suits you
it's
very
fun
well.
to go to Paris and get a pretty dress.
Yes.
Okay, so, and we are so colourful together, aren't we? So it's actually surprising, but we have the section Bring and Brag for 2 episodes in a row. That's because we only get to bring and brag about finished projects. And many of you will recognise that this was the beautiful project Andrew was working on. It's called Bowie. It's by the designer Lisa Richardson, and it comes from the book, the Rowan Magazine, number 67, and it's knitted in the Rowan fine lace here. And Andrew just did an absolutely beautiful job of this, and he knitted the vast majority of it, but just in the last couple of weeks I've finished it off and sewn it up because I wanted to get some wear of it in summer. So here's a picture of Andrew's work, and the design is knitted in pieces, and that's the back piece. And you might remember that he was keeping track of how many stitches it took him, and I think he calculated around 25,000 stitches just in that stocking stitch back piece. And the beautiful lace that's lying on the top of the sleeve cap, you can just see how beautifully he knitted that. It looks so neat. And that's really quite challenging lace because I tried it out myself. So eventually Andrew just got too sick to knit because it was hurting his eyes to look at his knitting. But before he stopped, he'd completed the back, he did a good 2/3 of the front, and he did both of the leafy lace cap sections here on the sleeves. And this was a perfect design for him to knit because he really loved relaxing with all of this stocking stitch, but he also really enjoyed the challenge of this beautiful lace here. And like I said, this is really quite challenging lace. So the leafy section here, you start knitting it from the top of the cap going downwards, and each row just gets wider and wider. And when you're down to about here, you've got about 300 stitches on your needles, and it's all divided up into these pattern repeats. And I think you've got about 9 or 10 pattern repeats. And then on the 10th one, it's exactly the same, but you just do something slightly different. And it's a real drag if you're knitting along and you're thinking, oh, is this the 8th or the 9th or the 10th repeat? And if you can't remember or you're slightly unsure, you have to go right back to the beginning of the row, count all your stitches and count the repeats to make sure that, yes, you are on the 10th repeat, and here you have to do something slightly different. So Andrew, and I think he told you about this, he set himself up on the table behind us, that's the kitchen table, and he devised a method to help him do this. And he had his lace chart all blown up in front of him, and he had a pile of coins, little brownies. So every time he'd completed a repeat and he's knitting along, he just shoved a coin from one pile to the next. And Andrew
I didn't know this.
You didn't know this?
No.
Yeah. Andrew is such a high-tech kind of a guy, right? And I used to tease him for devising such an archaic method of keeping track of his knitting, because it's the kind of thing that I would do. Like just very practical and kind of like belongs in a previous century, nothing to do with technology. But it really worked well. And that was he used to love it. Actually, he really enjoyed doing the lace, and he did such a beautiful job of it. Okay, so now I have done a modification to this design, but before I tell you about it, I want to show you an up-close photo on the beautiful teardrop back opening that you can't see. So when you've finished knitting all of the stocking stitch, you sew up the shoulder seams, and then you pick up stitches around the neck opening and also around the teardrop shaped hole at the back. And with a much smaller needle, I think I was using about a 2.25 millimeter, you do a few rows of garter stitch. Now I've left the button undone so that you can see the buttonhole loop really clearly, because I'd never done a buttonhole loop in this method before, and it was really easy to do. So you cast on a bunch of stitches, and I think I cast on about 10 or 12 stitches, and then immediately on the next row you cast off again. And then you use your two tail yarn ends to sew the loop together and down so it looks really neat and pretty. So now for the modification that I did. I changed the lace edging that goes around the bottom of the sleeve. So this leafy lace section here that Andrew knitted so beautifully, it starts up at the top of the cap and it's knitted downwards. And like I said, every row just gets wider and wider. And when you finish that section, you then knit a lace edging sideways onto the bottom of the sleeve, just like you'd knit a lace edging sideways around the edge of a shawl. So here's a picture of the original. It has a really large edging added to it, and while it does look stunning, particularly on this model, it just wasn't right for me, because firstly there's a ton of knitting in that lace edging, which I didn't want to do. There'd be twice as much knitting in that edging than in the leafy lace section above it. And when you block the lace out, the sleeves are really long and really wide, and the lace goes quite a long way down past your elbow, and there's a lot of material in them. And I just thought it would look too exaggerated for the kind of top that I wanted to wear on a day-to-day basis. It would look fantastic on a wedding dress, but I wanted to wear mine as often as possible. So I got out this wonderful book by Sharon Miller. It's called Heirloom Lace Knitting, so that I could pick an alternative lace edging. And I actually bought this book on our last trip to Shetland. And we featured a young Shetland lace knitter called Lauren Anderson in our Knitters of the World segment back in episode 87. And Lauren comes from a long line of expert Shetland lace knitters, and she's really passionate about learning all the traditional skills and keeping them alive. And she's already won lots of prizes with her really beautiful lace. So if you're inspired by Shetland lace, you definitely need to go back and watch Lauren's feature, which is in episode 87. And it was Lauren who recommended this book to me, and I actually found the lace edge pattern that Lisa Richardson used in her original design. And this book is really like a Bible for designing your own traditional Shetland lace shawl. It has a great selection of traditional centre patterns and border patterns and edging patterns, so you can mix and match most of them together and just come up with your own creation. So I was looking for a short edging, one that wouldn't add too much length to the sleeve, and each pattern in this book is graded from easy to very experienced, and in the end I decided on the absolute easiest pattern in the whole book. So here's a close-up of the edging that I picked. It's called the brand iron edging, and Sharon Miller writes in her book that the pattern is over 100 years old, and it's the edging that a Mrs. A. Hunter of Unst used for a well-known shawl pattern that was sold in wool stores all around Shetland. And Unst, by the way, is the northernmost island in Shetland, and it's the island that's most famous for Shetland lace. And Sharon goes on to say that it was this shawl pattern that got her first interested in this style of knitting. And this brand iron edging is a great edging to put around a simple baby hat.
What's also pretty cool is that you can read up on the individual histories of the patterns.
Yeah, all the stories and the history behind it. That makes it a really interesting read.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, I'm happy. I'm happy, much happier with the length of the sleeves, but I'm not quite sure about the scalloped edging because it's quite pronounced. And on the original design, the way the edging that Lisa Richardson picked doesn't have such a pronounced scalloping. It's more mild, and I do think it looks better. So ideally, I would have found a short lace edging pattern that was also simple but had more of a straighter edge, and then I think it would be perfect. You weren't sure about it either.
Yeah, look, I'm not the most stylish person, but I kind of thought it looked a little bit like lampshades.
I know, that wasn't very encouraging.
But it's nice and light. And
or then
wavy.
You thought it looked like Papagena from the Magic Flute, a costume. Anyway, I think
it's got something feathery about it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
All of my knitwear looks better on Madeline, so we did go out
doesn't.
It does, and this does. We did go out into the garden, and I took some footage of her wearing it so that you can see the beautiful design in all of its glory. So that's coming up now, and straight after that we go to Vermont to meet Tammy from Wing and a Prayer Farm.
on we go, heel for heel and toe for toe. Arm and on we go, off for Marie's wedding. Plenty herring, plenty meal, plenty pig to fill her cradle. Plenty bonny bands as well, that's the toast for Marie.
Hi, I'm Tammy White. Welcome to Wing and a Prayer Farm. I didn't always live on a farm. I was born in California in Los Angeles County, and I used to play on the streets with my friends in my neighborhood until I was a youth and moved to the Berkshires in Massachusetts. In New England, I learned about farming from my grandparents, whose retired dairy farm I lived on. I was involved in 4-H, and I learned about chickens, and I learned about horses and horse club. I learned about sewing. I baked pies with my grandmother, and I learned how to can from the garden. And there were 4 seasons. I really loved it. I moved to Vermont in 1987 and bought this property with 20 acres and raised my children. In 2001, the children were eager to bring some sheep to the farm, and so was I, to graze it rather than using fossil fuels to mow the property. I had been homeschooling them since 2000. They did all of the research on their own, and for about a year we visited different farms in Vermont and learned as much as we could until we finally decided to bring Shetland sheep to the farm. The Shetland sheep were a great way to start farming and fiber farm. We originally chose them because they were a smaller breed that we could handle for ourselves easily, as well as they were a hardy breed. So we knew the learning curve would be forgiving for us as new sheep farmers. And they were dual purpose in that we could use them for meat or fiber. I learned how to trim their hooves. I learned how to give them vaccinations. I learned about lambing with all of our wonderful Shetlands. And we learned about turning their wool into yarn. Now, I have more than 10 breeds of sheep. I have Angora goats and cashmere goats and alpacas, in addition to non-fiber animals such as a 300-pound pig named Princess Peppermint and over 70 different poultry, geese, turkeys, chickens, ducks. And they all have a purpose. Everybody has a reason for being here. But the stars, the fiber stars, are the sheep, the alpacas, and the goats. So the different animals are a lot to manage. People often ask me, like, why do you have so many breeds and why do you have so many different types of fiber animals? Wouldn't it be easier to have just one type or 2 types? And while that may be true, I can't actually imagine why I wouldn't, because to me, diversity is the key to life. And having so many different options for making yarns and for grazing the property and just the fulfillment that I get from all of the different personalities in the animals means that life is all the richer. So yes, there is more work in some ways, but it's certainly worth it. For example, the alpaca's fiber is so soft and lightweight and adds this wonderful drape to the yarns that we make that I would truly miss if we didn't have them. They're such interesting animals as well. They have such unique personalities and peculiar ways that I often say they're like the aliens of the farm. But they are shorn once a year, and so managing their shearing means that I sometimes choose a different way to process that fiber than the animals that get shorn earlier in the year in March and April. And then the Angora goats, they also have a different type of fiber and are more sensitive to the weather. So I really have to be careful to plan and time their shearing when the weather is less inclement, and so that they will be comfortable. And then the sheep have all different types of fleeces, in that we have long wool fleeces from the Teeswaters, Wensleydales, Cotswolds that grow so long that some mills won't take that fiber if it's too long. So we might shear them twice a year because of that reason. The other type of animal that we have on this farm that I did not bring to the farm so much as a fiber producer, but as a novelty, we'll say, are Valais black-nosed sheep. And so the reason why I won't talk about their fiber quality so much as I'll talk about the breed is because I'm doing something very special here on the farm. A few years ago, I had wanted to have Valais black-nosed sheep. I knew that they were from the Valais region of Switzerland and that we didn't have them in the United States yet, that the animals were not approved for import. But I dreamed that one day I would have them. And so I followed all of the online forums or groups, etc., that I could to learn more about them. And I got on some wait lists, and there was an auction that I had signed up for that came one day in 2018, in like winter of 2018, to my email that there was this opportunity to bid on Valley Black-nosed sheep semen imported from New Zealand. It had been approved. And so without hesitation, I went ahead and I bid on 4 straws of semen. And next thing you know, I'm an owner of Valley Black-nosed semen. I had to figure out what am I going to do with it. And so I got involved in the whole breed up program of having artificial insemination and reproductive specialists come to the farm. And the first lambs were born here, four lambs in 2019, spring of 2019. And I am now in going to be breeding, having more lambs this year that are, you know, of higher percentage of Valley Black-nosed, and every year hopefully breed up until I have 100% Valley Black-nosed genetics on the farm. And why do this? Well, it was something I was passionate about, and I had this vision of Valley Black-nosed sheep being one day part of the landscape of the sheep farms and dotting pastures in the same way in the United States that they do dot the Swiss Alps and New Zealand and the UK's pastures. They're a beautiful animal, and I wanted to be a part of bringing them to the United States. Their fiber is a little bit coarser, but it's a long wool, and the long staple length make it excellent for hand spinning. And this year we will be spinning and weaving our Valley Black-nosed fibers so that we will have some home goods to offer in the fall and winter of 2021 in Valley Black-nosed fiber. And now I want to talk about how I put the fibers together for the different yarns that we make. I like to look at the fiber in our flock as each one being a separate ingredient. For example, the fine wool from the cormos is white and it's loaded with crimp. It has a very uniform staple length. It's a bouncy fiber, and it's going to add all that wonderful texture, that soft, fine, low micron count and crimp to any yarn and enhance it. And then another type of fiber, quite different by comparison from the long wool sheep, is, here's an example of some teeswater fiber, which has a very long staple length and a lot of luster and significant crimp, adding a different element to our recipe of yarns. We have some mohair here to look at from the Angora goats, considerably silkier and finer. It shimmers and it glows and contributes so much halo. And so we take all of these different types of fiber and we make the most beautiful recipes of yarn. One of the top yarns that we sell here on the farm is a 2-ply DK, and it's called Thelma and Louise. And this is a blend of that long wool. I showed you the Teeswater, Cotswold, Wensleydale, and also mohair, and also some fine wool from the Cormo sheep. And we get this milled at a local mill that does worsted yarns for us. All of our mills are about an hour's drive or less. And it makes a nice round yarn with lots of bounce. It has a lot of halo, soft but strong and very resilient. The Shetland sheep, of which we have many on the farm, all have a beautiful downy undercoat and then some long straight guard hairs. We take their wool and bring it to a local woolen mill and have them spin it up into this yarn that we call All the Single Ladies. This is a gray base, so we blend the fibers from the Shetland sheep together, and then I over dye it with natural dyes. All the Single Ladies is the name I gave it because it originally started with all of the Shetland ewes wool, and it is a 3-strand single ply worsted weight yarn. Another yarn that we use use our Shetland and our colored merino wool with is called Hay Sugar, and it's a nice round Aran weight. It's 3-ply, The base of it is usually a cocoa color because the merino sheep on the farm are colored merinos. It's long wearing, but so lightweight. And if you have a cardigan in this, it will be a wonderful long wearing cardigan, but at the same time, it will be so light as a feather because the Shetland fiber is so light. And then another yarn that we make that combines, again, nice recipe from the alpacas and the Shetlands is a yarn that I call Spice Girls. And this one is a 3-ply sport. It has a dense but relaxed fabric because of the drape from the alpaca. And it's so soft, it's great for next to the skin. Has excellent stitch definition. This little tiny cardigan is made with it. It really likes cables too, adds some durability. So we do so many different things with all of the different fibers from all of the animals, and I think it just adds an element of fun to the farm yarns. Another thing that we do here on the farm is we naturally dye. For example, this is a shawl that I'm wearing by Bristol Ivy, and it's called the Haven Shawl, and it's knit up in our Thelma and Louise. And I dyed this shawl with rhubarb leaves and willow and indigo. And I just love natural dyeing. I started natural dyeing after I had seen a booth at a festival in Vermont where they had so many pinks and golds, and I learned that they had used natural materials for the dyes, and I never looked back since then. Felt like all of that I am doing on this farm here to try to, better the earth, take good care of the animals, and be a good steward of the earth. Mostly my daughter and I are dyeing everything from the things that we grow. So we have a dye garden in the back, and we start the seeds inside and set them out. We dig up the roots, we collect acorns, rhubarb leaves from the rhubarb plants, and so on and so forth. And I make great kettles of color in my backyard. My favorite dyes are coreopsis. We grow coreopsis in the garden and start the seeds each spring. Many times it self-sows, and so you have like volunteer coreopsis all around the farm. And we harvest the tiny little flowers, which yield so much beautiful color. Great deep shades of pumpkins and oranges and apricots, depending on how much I'm using at a time, how many skeins of yarn I'm putting into the kettle at a time. I often get asked, how do you ensure color fastness or light fastness when you're naturally dyeing? Because it has a reputation to be fugitive, not being acid dyed. But I am very thorough in scouring the wool ahead of time and making sure it's very clean. When it comes back from the mills, I need to make sure that it's really well cleaned, because there is a certain amount of mill grease that is on the yarn when it comes back. And then after that, I need to make sure that I mordant it properly, which means preparing it to bind the color to it from whatever the natural elements are that I'm using for dyes. I also give it plenty of time. I do not rush the process. So when it's time for the prepared fiber to be in the kettles of color, there is no rush. They can sit and they can marinate in their colors as long as they need to. And at the end, I wash it all again so that when people get the yarns from us, they are ready to go onto the needles and into a garment or whatnot, and they will be color fast. Sometimes you get a little bit of color off in your hands or whatnot, but it doesn't bleed. The colors don't bleed. In summary, I just want to say that being on this farm with all of the work that's involved has been such a rich part of my life I never imagined. No, I don't get to travel very much, and I don't get very fancy when I get dressed up, and there's late hours and continuous hours, but I love it all. And I feel like everything that we turn out from the farm has that love built into it, so that we're not only making the world a better place by being conscientious stewards of the earth here and humanely raising animals, but we're taking that and sending it out into the world. And some fiber artists will put that yarn on their needles or on their hook or on their loom, wherever, and they will feel that love and they will feel that energy, and it will continue to give. Thank you, Fruity Knitting, for having me as part of your wonderful contribution to all of the world of fiber artists. Taking that wool coat off helps.
I really enjoyed editing that segment because it was just so visually interesting. What a beautiful farm she has.
What a great place for a family holiday.
Yeah, actually, I'm not sure whether she's got accommodation available. She might have, but she's got a very elaborate website that you can go and check out. And as Tammy said, having such a diverse range of fibre animals may not be the most efficient or business-like way of running a farm, but it certainly adds to the charm and interest if you're a visitor. And I think it's wonderful that she can do the whole process from sheep to final finished dyed skein just on her farm, with just the spinning bit being done, I think she said about an hour's drive away.
Yeah, all her yarns have really groovy names. Like, what was one of them? The Spice Girls or All the Single Ladies?
All the Single Ladies is because of the ewes, because she mainly has ewes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, and Thelma and Louise was another one.
Okay.
And the colours are really stunning. There was a really beautiful purpley blue yarn there, and I was really wondering what kind of plant she used to get that.
So Tammy is offering Fruity Knitting patrons a 10% discount off any purchase from her Etsy shop, so that's very exciting. Tammy has lots of lovely yarn, both dyed and undyed, but she also has farm-made tallow and goat's milk soap. And you can buy tickets for her Natural Dye Indigo virtual workshop, which sounds like a lot of fun. So thank you, Tammy, very much.
So back in episode 111, we featured the UK designer Flora Collingwood-Norris, who's got a wonderful series of downloadable tutorials on visible mending. So that means that once you get a tear or a hole in one of your woolen garments, instead of trying to do a really perfect, neat, invisible mend, you can darn or weave an elaborate and colourful pattern over it, or you could even embroider a picture over it. So here's some examples of Flora's work, and the aim, of course, is to draw your eye to the mend and make the mend a new feature of the garment. And I think Flora does this in some of the most beautiful and creative ways that I've ever seen. So if you're inspired by that, definitely go back and watch her interview in episode 111. So soon after doing that interview with Flora, I got a whopping big hole in the left elbow of this jumper here. So many of you will remember this is a Marie Wallen design. It's called Sky, and it comes from her North Sea collection. I love this jumper, and I wore it probably the most out of all of my jumpers last winter, and that's probably why it did get a hole in the elbow. And one of the things that I really enjoy about this jumper or this design is that even though it's got this very complex twisted stitch pattern that's all over the body and the sleeves of it, it's still a simple and elegant design, and it looks really balanced. And I didn't want to disturb the balance by making a real feature of my mend, because even if I picked this salmon colour here and did a mend on the elbow, either in a different pattern or just even using that colour, I think it would make the design look less sort of elegant and more rustic, just make it look more casual, which is what I didn't want. So despite being incredibly inspired by Flora's stunning visible mending tutorials and also just trying to find an opportunity to use them and try them out, in the end I decided to go for an invisible mend, which was really challenging on this design, but it did work out really well, so I want to tell you all about it. So here's a picture of the hole. You can see it's a pretty big hole. So I went down to about 4 rows below the hole, and starting slightly wider than the hole, I picked up a row of stitches by slipping the needle through the right leg of each stitch in that row. Now, not all the stitches were knit stitches, some were purl stitches, and some stitches were also cabled, so I had to do that really slowly and carefully. But this picture just shows you what it looks like having done that. Now the next step I just had to improvise because I didn't have the pattern chart with me. I was at the cancer clinic with Andrew and the pattern chart was at home. So I had to figure out how to do this pattern, which I hadn't done for a year, by looking at the knitting that was already done on my jumper. Another thing is this was all knitted in the round. So the sleeve was knitted in the round, which meant that I never did the pattern on a wrong side row. But with my little mend, I had to knit back and forward on my mend. So it also meant that I had to figure out what the pattern would be when you're doing it on a wrong side row. So
Gosh, you're clever.
No, it sounds really clever. It sounds clever and difficult, but actually it's much easier than what you might imagine, which was a big relief. So I knitted a little flap in the same pattern as the section that was missing, and at the end of every right side row, I found it easy to attach the knitting to an edge stitch, which closed up most of the left side of the flap, making it look seamless. But I didn't have much success doing that on the other side, so I had to leave that side open. And as I knitted higher, I reduced the number of stitches, and when I got to the length of about 4 rows higher than the hole, using a second needle, I picked up a row of stitches above the hole and I grafted the stitches from both needles together, and I had to do that graft also in pattern. And then after that, I neatly closed up the side gaps with the 2 tail ends of yarn. Now here's a picture of the wrong side. After I'd closed up the side gaps, I also used the tail ends of the yarn to catch the loose stitches around the hole on the wrong side so that they wouldn't fray down any further. And then in this picture here, it shows you the finished mend on the right side of the garment. And I think it looks wonderful. If your eye goes down to the same pattern below, you can see that my mend isn't actually neat, but it does look really similar. And when I had a look at it again this morning to show you, I couldn't find it. I can only feel it on the inside of the garment. So there it is there. I don't know if you can see that, but I think I've done a pretty good job. I'm really proud of it.
Well done.
Yeah. Okay, so now I want to show you my brand new project, which I'm incredibly excited about. This here is the yarn kit for a Bohus Stickning design called the Wild Apple. So I've got a whole lot of yarn all tangled up here. Here it is here. So you've got all these little bits of colour.
They're so beautiful.
And this is the main body colour here, and it's for the Wild Apple. And this kit was very generously gifted to me from Pernilla Silverberg. And I've actually fell in love with this design when I first stumbled across a picture of it, which was long before I even knew what Bohus Stickning was, or even thought to do a feature on Bohus Stickning. So here's a picture up close of the Wild Apple yoke. The design is also called the Masterpiece because it uses up to 4 colours in a row compared to the normal 2 colours per row used in traditional Fair Isle. But I'm not fazed by that because in total I think there's only about 4 or 5 such rows, but most of the rows do use 3 colours per row. And there's also the typical Bohus Stickning pearl stitches, which you might be able to see in the photo. The pearl stitches just give extra texture, and they also help to blur the edges of the patterning, and that makes it look like the colours are bleeding or melting into each other. So here's my yoke, which I've just started. I won't say much about it in this episode. I'm going to go into a lot of detail in the next episode, but I just wanted to show you how beautiful it's looking, all the lovely colours. So if you would like to start a Bohus Stickning design yourself, I want to remind you that we do have a Bohus Stickning knit along going on over at our Fruity Knitting Ravelry group. Now, last episode I said that we would also do it in the Patron Community Forum. Unfortunately, the Patron Community Forum was something that Andrew started, organised and monitored completely himself, and it's not working at the moment, and we need to look into it and figure out what service or service provider we need to pay to get it back up and running. That's something that is on the to-do list. Madeline is sort of helping me do that. There's so much goes on behind the scenes that you won't see just from the video. Because Andrew was working full-time with me and we were working 7 days a week beforehand. So there's a lot that I can't take on immediately. I'm just trying to do what I can and do that well. And but it is, the Patreon Community Forum is something that's on our to-do list to get back up and running for you. Anyway, there is a lot of discussion happening over in the Ravelry group, and a lot of projects are being started. So even if you don't want to do a Bohus Stickning design for yourself, I think you'd have a lot of fun just going over and watching and following along and watching other people's projects as they develop. You'd probably learn a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, and I also want to say that Pernilla is going to extend the patron discount, the Fruity Knitting patron discount on all of her woolen yarns until the 20th of August. And this wonderful book here, which has got the whole story of Bohus Stickning in it, but it's also got a whole lot of patterns in it. Unfortunately, that's been sold out, but she will be getting in some more copies of this in September. And when she does, she's going to offer Fruity Knitting patrons another discount on the book. So we will keep this Bohus Stickning knit along going for a long time. So don't worry about if you're sort of late to join in. There'll still be plenty of time to finish. Yeah.
Yep, and we also want to remind you to watch right to the end of the episode because there is another Easter egg waiting for you there. The cute kids are my little cousins, Simba and Leia. Simba has just turned 7 and she's really getting into her knitting. Her mum is my Aunt Fiona and Mum's younger sister. And Simba used to go to a Waldorf school, but since the COVID lockdown, Fiona has continued by homeschooling her in a Waldorf-inspired fashion, which includes lots of crafts and gardening, music, and they don't use any screens. I think they don't even have a television in the house. So that would mean that Simba's only exposure to media is through watching the Fruity Knitting podcast with her mum, which we think is really funny.
It's hilarious. They actually get excited to watch Fruity Knitting. That's amazing. The little one just loves the classical music and just dances all the time.
It's so sweet.
It is very funny. I think her favourite parts, Simba's favourite parts, is us on the couch, particularly when you're on the screen. I think she's always asking Fiona to fast forward to when Madeline's on the screen, which is super cute. And I think she also likes the Meet the Shepherdess segments because of all of the animals. So Simba, there's a lot of animals in today's episode, so I think you should really enjoy it.
Yeah. Anyway, Fiona is now pregnant with twins, so she has less and less time to show Simba all the new knitting techniques. Simba's currently working on a poncho for herself, which you'll see at the end of the episode, and she is following a pattern for that. But she's also creating heaps of her own projects, testing out the techniques she sees Mum do on the podcast. She's super creative. I'm very proud of her. Fiona has taught her quite a few things. So Fiona taught her how to do the knit and purl stitch, ribbing, make ones, yarn overs, and how to cast off a garment or whatever she's knitting. Yeah. And Simba taught herself how to cast on by finger knitting the stitches and then sliding them across on the needles.
That's so inventive.
Yes, she's very inventive. The other day she watched a video by Mum, a tutorial on how to knit without a cable needle.
How to do cables without a cable needle.
Yes, yeah. I'm sorry. Anyway, Simba did that during rest time and she thought her results were very beautiful.
Yeah, I think she came up to Fiona and she said, "Look, Mum." And Fiona said, "What's that?" She said, "It's a cable. I did it without a cable needle."
What a groovy kid.
I think what she's doing is she probably doesn't understand everything that I say, but she grasps the basic concepts. And then during her afternoon rest time, she gets her needles out and kind of does her own version, which is really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. She also knitted a poncho for her dog with a frill around the neck.
Yeah.
And when Fiona asked her how she did that, she just said that she made lots of increases on one row by knitting into the ladders between the stitches. So it's always fun and exciting to hear about Simba's latest knitting experiments.
Definitely.
Yeah. So Fiona herself, she started binge watching Fruity Knitting last year during the COVID lockdown. And ever since, she likes to tease Mum about all the time. Mum generously declares on the podcast she is knitting a project for somebody else, and then right at the end she changes her mind again.
And keeps it.
Yeah.
It started, I think, with the sculptured frost by Linda Marving.
That's
I was
right,
planning to do that for Fiona. Yeah.
You're evil, Mum.
And she got really excited, and then a few episodes later, I think I'll keep it myself.
It's a great temptation when you're knitting a beautiful garment. But then it also happened when you were knitting these crochet animals. This is Geraldine the duck and Cindy the flamingo. And Mum, you guys announced back then on the podcast that they were going to be presents for Simba and Leia.
It's true.
And then when they were finished, you liked them so much you decided they should sit on our windowsill back there.
Yeah, but to be fair, here, pass them over. It was because Dad fell in love with them. Like, he is so not a stuffed toy kind of a guy, but he thought they had such distinct personalities and he just fell in love with them. So I thought, well, I've got to keep them.
They are very sweet.
They are very sweet. So I think poor Fiona had to fast forward this section. So, and you're going to have to do it today as well, Fiona, just so that poor Simba and Leia didn't see. But to be fair, Andrew did knit Simba a really beautiful jumper with a tiger's head on it. So I'll put it up on the screen just to remind you. So.
I think it was meant to be a lion's head, like Simba the lion, but you only found a tiger pattern back then, didn't you? Yeah. So we just finished watching the Hobbit movies together, and since then I suspect Mum might have dragon sickness, like the dwarf king Thorin Oakenshield. There's a scene towards the end of the movie where Thorin is standing in the massive halls of the Misty Mountain, of the Lonely Mountain, and the halls are filled with piles and piles of glittering treasure. And you see Thorin has this mad gleam in his eyes and he refuses to part with a single piece of this treasure. And that is because he has dragon sickness, which I think Mum has, but with knitwear. You should see her closets. They're like filled with these piles of gorgeous knitwear designs.
That's true. And whenever I knit a design for you, because we wear the same colours, it's really hard for me to give it away.
Yes, that's true. But also when I knit something nice, you like to eye it. Mum had her eye on my mittens the other day.
I think I have dragon sickness.
Yeah, I argued that my hands are larger, so the mittens are too large for her. There's no point in stealing them.
Yeah.
They're not going to fit you.
Okay. I'm going to get into trouble for this, I can tell. Anyway, I would like to remind our Shetland and Merino patrons that we have an archive of around 50 audio podcasts that you can download and listen to. And each audio podcast is a little bit over 1 hour long. It features a great guest that we've already had on the show, but this time our patrons have written in questions for the guest to answer. So that means that we cover different information than what we originally did in the interview, the video interview. And there's often quite a lot of extra technical information covered as well. So this month we had Emma Boyles from the Grey Sheep Company as our guest, and we had a wonderful discussion about conservation practices, farming culture and sheep husbandry. And next month we'll have 2 live events, one with Tina Whitmore from Fryer Fibres on the 1st of August, and then one with Coty from Nomadnus on the 28th of August. And Shetland patrons can attend the event live, and the audio podcast is then available for Shetland and Merino patrons after I've cleaned it up a bit and edited it. Madeline and I are very grateful for the ongoing financial support of our patrons, so thank you so much. It is my full-time job, and Madeline is now helping me as much as she can alongside her full-time university studies. So we do ask you that if you are watching the show to please support our work by becoming a patron. It is really our only source of income. So it's easy to do that. You can follow the link that's on the screen or in the description box below. There's a live link. You can pick your level of support, and it's very easy and flexible. So thank you very much.
So we're going to say goodbye now, because coming up is the second interview with Pernilla Silverberg. And don't forget to watch the Easter egg at the very end. It's very sweet and will make you smile.
Yes, it should give you some joy.
Yeah.
So thanks for spending time with us. Bye.
Bye.
Welcome to Fruity Knitting. This is our second interview with Pernilla Silverberg from Bohus Stickning. The Bohus Stickning brand started in the 1930s to provide an income for poor families in Bohuslän, Sweden. And over the next 30 years, the brand became known worldwide for its exquisite high fashion designs. In our first interview, Pernilla told us the story of how Bohus Stickning developed from its beginning in the 1930s until its end in 1969. But the story does continue because in the 1990s there was a strong revival led by the Bohuslän Museum. And since then, Pernilla's been authorised to keep producing the patterns and yarn kits with fibre from her farm of around 200 Angora rabbits. If you haven't seen the first interview, I do highly recommend that you go back and watch that one first for continuity. And then in this interview, we'll talk about the Bohus Stickning revival and Pernilla's work with her Angora rabbits. Pernilla, it is so good to have you back again to continue the story. We're very excited that you're here again.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
So we left off in the first interview with Emma Jakobsen closing Bohus Stickning in 1969, and then if we fast forward to the 1990s, Bohus Stickning had a revival through the textile artist and dyer Solveig Gustafsson. And Solveig worked very closely with the Bohuslän Museum to recreate the patterns in the hand-dyed yarn so that hand knitters could make these designs, because prior to that, Bohus Stickning was only available as ready-made garments to buy. So can you now tell us about the revival that happened in the 1990s through Solveig Gustafsson and some of the challenges that she had?
Yes, I will be happy to do so. I will start with telling a bit about Solveig Gustafsson. She was, as you say, a textile artist, and she lives in Göteborg, in Bohuslän. She worked for many years as a CEO secretary for a big Swedish company, but she wanted to use her creative skills more. So she made an early retirement and started her own company, Solsilke. So she dyed silk yarn, and silk is quite difficult to dye actually, but she was very skilled and she had the knowledge needed to do it successfully. So she made some wonderful designs of her own, and she sold yarn and kits and also finished garments. Then she got in contact with Bohusläns Museum. That was in 1998. She was participating in a workshop which was about to use the museum's collections for inspiration to create new designs. And she did some beautiful designs, and they were later sold also from the Bohusläns Museum's shop. So when Bohusläns Museum were planning to do an anniversary celebration for Bohus Stickning, Bohus Stickning in 1999, it would be 60 years since it started and 30 years since it ended. So they were thinking about recreating one Bohus Stickning pattern, and if possible, even to make some kits for hand knitters to be able to knit. They have had this request for many years. So they asked Solveig if perhaps she could be of help. But this was not just to go ahead and do this. There were rights to be considered, and also in respect for Bohus Stickning and the designers who had worked there. Permissions had to be given. So there were contact with Emma Jakobsen's daughter, Ingrid Mesterton. And they were, of course, skeptical and a bit worried that if recreated and not in the same good quality as Bohus Stickning was, what would it mean to Bohus Stickning? So they were protective and skeptical, and it was not that easy to get this permission. But, well, one design, Ingrid Mesterton gave her permission to recreate, and that was the Green Meadow. I have it here for you to see. I talked about it also on my first interview. And this is of pure woolen yarns. It's quite easy, one of the easier ones to do. It has only 3 pattern colors and one natural gray-brown, and then the light grain color as the main color, with one colored back and sleeve and patterned fronts. So this design is the one that Solveig was asked if she could help to recreate. And then to do this, a meeting was arranged with two of the designers who were working at Bohus Stickning until the very end at 69. So Solveig met Kerstin Olsson and Karin Iversson, and they were helpful and guided her with information about which yarn she should use and all details she needed. And so she started, and during that winter and spring, she actually recreated 12 items for the Green Meadow. This was Anna-Lisa Mannheimer Lund's design. And it was beautifully displayed at the anniversary celebration. So it was a great success. Knitters all over the world were thrilled that finally there were kits available for Bohus Stickning to knit. So, of course, more questions came for more designs to be recreated. This was a problem since Ingrid Mesterton had given her design to just this one garment, the Green Meadow. But of course, the next that was in Bohus Länsmuseum's and Solveig's mind to reproduce would be the Blue Shimmer. The Blue Shimmer was the most sold design throughout the 30 years Bohus Stickning was active, and also in the years after that. That's the design that was of the greatest interest. So Solveig actually borrowed an old original hat of the Blue Shimmer and thought that she would give it a try. Unfortunately, Bohus Länsmuseum did not have any garments for her to use, and this old hat was, from aging and having been used a lot, she was not sure that she could rely on these colors. So she traveled to many museums, trying to find the material she needed. Eventually, she got hold on just half a yoke, and she had the colors, the original colors from which she could compare and dye and make the recipes. And then she knitted one pullover and one cardigan of the Blue Shimmer with the light blue main color. Now, would this be accepted of Ingrid Mesterton was the question. So, a meeting was set at Bohus Länsmuseum. Inga Lillhammer was the person there responsible for the Bohus Sticknings in the shops. And she set a meeting with Solveig Gustafsson and Ingrid Mesterton, and also Kerstin Olsson was present. And behind curtains, waiting, were two from the museum called Anna-Lena Segestam McPhee and Marie Johansson. They were wearing the Blue Shimmer pullover and the other in the cardigan. And then everybody was holding their breath when they stepped forward in front of Ingrid Mesterton and Kerstin Olsson to see what would be the reaction. Everybody were worried. But it was like, Ingrid just looked at these two Blue Shimmer recreations for a while, and then she said, "It's just like in Mother's days."
Ah, that's a beautiful story.
So you can imagine it must have been such a relief, both for Solveig and Inga-Lill, and I imagine also for Ingrid and Kerstin Olsson.
Yeah.
So somehow at that point, Solveig gained the trust, and they understood that she was just as perfectionist, and that she would take care of it, and that it would be okay to recreate even the Blue Shimmer. And so they did.
And then did it just continue on from then? After the trust and the working relationship was established, did she just continue to take one pattern at a time and reproduce the colours and make it available?
You can put it that quite simple, but it was an enormous work for her. It was just not to do. She needed the materials, she needed the original colors, she needed the original garments. So what she did was to take contact with the designers. So the next one she did was Karin Iversson's design, the large lace color, and the rose lace color, and the yellow lace color, 3 variants of Karin's design. And she went to Karin, visited her several times, and she had to acknowledge her result before she could start producing any kits. So that was the first designs. And then she just continued, and over time she recreated 170 hues and 70 different patterns. I have also a little story that she told me that I would like to share with you.
Yes.
And that was immediately after they had reproduced the blue shimmer. Solveig went to a handcraft exhibition, a festival, where she sold her own yarn and her own designs. And then she wasn't quite sure if at that point she was allowed to promote Bohus Stickning. But that was exactly the time where they had started to sell the kits from the museum. But she brought one blue shimmer pullover and just hung it there in her exhibition.
Yeah.
And then there was this one lady, so I guess 75 was her age, and she just stood for a long time and looked at this blue shimmer pullover. So long that Solveig eventually had to go to her and just ask if she was okay, or if she could be of any help. And then she saw that this lady was actually crying. So tears were running down her cheek, and she just said that not in her lifetime she thought that she would ever see this design again. So it was just like she was trying to hold the moment. And then Solveig understood how it actually affected people and what it meant to them, to the ones who remembered it. So it was it's very touching, and it was a great success to make a revival.
That is such a beautiful story. I'm all emotional listening to it because so much you can hear from what you've told us how intense it was for Solveig to gain the trust and to be as authentic as possible, and how reluctant the designers were at first for someone to come in and maybe just lower the quality of the designs. And you can understand from your description the fear that was going on, and it was great to see that they finally did have trust. And yeah, that's a beautiful story. So Pernilla, how did you come to take over Bohus Stickning?
Well, there was at some point Solveig thought that now I've been doing this for long, and both she and her husband Lars Erik, who had been of so much help and support and very active in every step, actually, he too, they wanted to retire. And at that time, they've been selling kits through the internet, and the internet was getting going. So it was not an easy task to just go out and tell all knitters that now there is no continuing to reproducing or making kits and provide the kits. So well, it was difficult. It was a problem for the museum. They thought they had kits in stock that would last a year, and this was all sold out in just 3 weeks. So you can imagine. And then at the same time, there was, this scandal about how Angora rabbits in China were not treated so well, and in the media in Sweden, on the news all over Sweden, they were showing films about how the Chinese breeders were wiping off the wool from the rabbits while they were screaming, and everybody was really shocked, and it was just horrible to see. And that was about the same time when Solveig made her final decision that she couldn't continue to do this work. But then, about these Chinese Angora rabbits, I saw it too. And I had these, at that time, 100 to 150 Angora rabbits, and I just felt so bad. I felt sick. So a spontaneous reaction for me was to just write down how I felt, and also describe how we do in Sweden and in Scandinavia, and I believe in all of Europe, that we do not treat our rabbits like this. I cut all my rabbits with a little hand scissor, and they are very relaxed and actually enjoys this. So I wrote about that, and people just needed to hear this. So this story of mine went viral. So it was just spread it over internet many times. And the following weekend, I designed a little hat with pure Angora, and it was just a white wrap. It was not a white hat. It was not very pretty. It had little red hearts on it. It was just like sending a message by Angora with your heart. And I sold the instruction and tried to collect money to do something for the Angora rabbits in China. And the newspapers wrote about this. And the Bohus Museum saw this article, and they contacted me. But a few months later, I needed to learn to dye yarns myself, because the spinning mill's requirements, the terms for the minimum quantity I needed to spin, was a problem to me. So I had to learn how to dye the yarns myself. So I phoned Solveig, and we talked for long over the phone. This was around New Year from 2013-14, those days. And it was a very important first phone call. We realized that we were very alike. So I promised her to go and see, and that was actually the start of it. And to go back to about the hand dyeing of yarns, she was so helpful, and she told me everything I needed, and it was just to get started.
So as you said, Solveig retired around 2014 and handed Bohus Stickning to you. So you've been doing it now for about 6 years. Has she continued to mentor you during this time?
Solveig have been great, simply just great. I did exactly as she said. I bought all the materials I needed, the dyeing powder and everything, and I just did as she told me to do. She sent by postage samples of the correct colors, and through the email, she sent me the recipes about how to dye the colors. So the first ones I did was both the New Azalean and the Forest Darkness, both on black main color. The New Azalean with just 5 pattern colors, and the Forest Darkness had 6 pattern colors, so they were quite easy to start with. The New Azalea with some red shades, and Forest Darkness was greens and blue. So it was quite a palette to start with. So when I have dyed the colors and I was satisfied, then I went to her, and we, the hours just went too fast. I felt like a daughter when coming to their home. And, I had 5 children at that time, age 1 to 11 years of age. So often I had them with me. So we became very good friends, and how she mentored me, I had all the help I needed. So I was a success too, I can say. And then at the same time, when Solveig she wanted to retire, Bohus Museum would make a book about Solveig's work to honor what she had done to the revival, and also to summarize all of her work. And that book was planned before they found me, but anyway, it was to be published. I had 1 year on me to be able to recreate all colors ready for when the book was published. So that was my time frame.
My goodness, you must have been so busy. 5 children, Angora rabbits, and doing this. That's an incredible accomplishment. Okay, now together you and your husband farm around 250 Angora rabbits for their wool. So we'd love to hear about the rabbits now. What is involved in breeding Angora rabbits to harvest their wool?
Yes, you're right. We have by now 250 Angora rabbits on our farm, and that's the number of Angora rabbits that I aim for. And then I talk about adult rabbits who produces the first class wool that I need in the yarns. The Angora rabbits are the core of everything I do. So what's the most important for me, what is it all about for me, is actually the rabbits. The rabbits came first. They came prior to the interest of knitting or anything else. I'm actually a sea captain, and my husband is too. And I've been doing nothing else but sailing since I was 18 years old. My mother told me to knit when I was a child, but during the years at sea I didn't knit much. But just to make a point of it, that the rabbits are the most important, the starting of everything, and then all the others come with it. So I have to give my rabbits all attention, always. And then sometimes people have to wait to get an answer on the mail they sent me yesterday, or wait a few days to get their ordered kit or something, because the rabbits, they are so important. It has to be the best health, and they have to be well treated in order to give the best wool. That's quite natural. So, and they are actually 8 months old before I can use the wool for yarn. From the younger rabbits, it's a different kind of wool that is more that could be used for felted products, and the same actually with the wool from the rabbit's belly, which is why I only use the wool from their backs and sides. So Angora rabbits, they are adorable. They have their own personality, and they are all actually very, very calm and easy to handle. I cut their wool with a little hand scissor once every 3 months, and I use a hand scissor for 3 reasons. Actually, because I want it to be nice and quiet and cozy. I don't want a machine making noises. And also, like that, I have all wool goes through my fingers, so I can sort it and be sure to only use the first-class wool. That's individual from one rabbit to the other, how far down the sides I can go. And also I ensure that you have no little millimeters of, double cut if I cut the same fiber twice. So I avoid that actually by using a hand scissor, even if it's possible to do it with a machine. So I prefer to do it that way. So it takes sometimes, it takes me about 5 minutes actually, no more than 5 minutes to cut off the wool from the back and sides. And then, of course, on the belly, it takes a little longer, I reckon 15 minutes, because there are legs and things you don't want to cut, and it's a bit tricky. Yeah? So it will actually lie on its back like a little baby when I cut the wools on the belly. So it's a joyful work to have to take care of my rabbits.
And how much wool can you get from a healthy rabbit?
Well, my very best rabbits actually give 200 grams of first-class wool. I only count the first-class wool on their backs and sides. If you count the wool from the belly, I believe you're up to 300 or so. But then that's just my very best, my best 10%. And of course, it's those that I want to breed on. What's most important is, of course, their health and the quality, but that they have a good amount too, of course, is important. But health and quality is what I breed for, actually. So 200 grams on my very best, and then in average, I say 130 grams of wool. I have both white rabbits. They've been breeded for several hundreds of years, so those are the ones who gives the most wool. And then we have some colored rabbits too. I have many different, actually, but I put them into 3 categories, the white, the yellow, and the gray. And half of my rabbits are white, and the yellow and gray, well, that's 1/4 of each. And they don't give as much wool as the white ones, since you've used short-haired rabbits to be able to get the colors on the rabbits. But I think they are so adorable, and they give a life to the garments and to the yarn, which you cannot achieve by dyeing it. So these natural colored yellows and grays, well, I'm no businesswoman, I can tell, because then I would have only white rabbits. But they give me something that, and it's so joyful to work with them. So 130 grams per rabbit is the average if I count them all.
So what are the special qualities of Angora wool?
Well, Angora wool is very special. It is the softest wool you can get, and it is very fluffy, because the fibers, they are so fine. It's very fine fibers, and they are hollow, so they weigh nearly nothing. So it's very, very light, and also it has a very good warm insulating effect.
I've heard that divers actually wear Angora gloves and socks.
Yeah, that's right. It's very popular amongst the divers and fishermen and hunters because it is so warm and it's so light. And your backpackers, it weighs nothing, so you can easily pack an Angora pullover and go climbing or whatever. And it can obtain several times more moisture compared to sheep wool, for instance, so that you will not feel wet, even if it is wet. My own children, they have been, all of them, of course, having socks and hats and so, and they can play outdoor in the snow a whole day. And it will be, of course, wet on the outside, but it will be as dry and warm on the inside. So it's an amazing fiber actually to work with. It's also dirt repellent, which is very good when you have 5 children out in the snow and in the woods. And it's strong actually. You wouldn't think that it is this strong because it's so fine fibers. And when you talk about tensile strength, it's actually stronger than sheep wool. So it's an amazing fiber actually.
And you combine it together with merino wool, don't you?
That's right. That's a good point. There is absolutely no elasticity in Angora. There are no fat or grease in it either. So it's it does not hold together at all. It just flies away. It's very light. And when I cut the rabbits, it just falls down like snow, nothing that holds it together. So because there's no elasticity in it, it's a good thing to blend with some sheep wool, lamb's wool. So that's what we do in our yarns used for Bohus Stickning. We have 50% of Angora and 50% merino wool that is blended on the spinning mill. So that will help keeping your garment in shape and, the ripping back into...
Yes, that's what I remember you telling me before, that it's if you do a mistake in your knitting, you can actually rip back quite a few times and the quality of the Angora wool will stay the same. Is that correct?
That's correct. You do not have to be afraid of knitting in Angora because it's too fine and you don't have to be afraid that it's not possible to unravel. You can unravel many, many times and it is still beautiful and it lasts for long. It ages beautiful. It's a material that actually it will become more and more pretty over years. When the yarn comes from the spinning mill, all fibers are the same, going the same direction. And then when you knit from it, then the fluffiness of the Angora content comes forward. And even more when you use the Angora garment. So my children have had sweaters that I actually haven't even washed it because I didn't feel it necessary. So you don't have to be afraid that it's too an expensive fiber to use because it is no problem to use it. It will just be as red wine better over years.
That's a good description. Okay, so what would you say to knitters who are considering taking on a Bohus Stickning project? What advice have you got for them?
Yes, first of all, I would like to say that you don't have to be afraid to knit. It's not that difficult and it's not a special technique somehow. It is actually just knits and purls, and if you knit pullovers, you have rows with increasings or decreasings. So it's not that complicated as you should think. And also you could try out with just knitting a hat for a start. That's actually what I would advise to do if you want a smaller project. Start with a hat. Needles 40 centimeters, and you see how the patterns turn out, and it's just to feel and enjoy seeing the patterns grow and experience the softness of the patterns. This is the forest darkness, and that's all about Bohus Stickning. I believe both what we do today and to connect to the story that's behind it, that you can just let the minds flow and to the Swedish forests, and it will, it's like therapy actually.
Yes, that's a stunning design. Okay, have you got any other designs that you can show at different skill levels?
Yes, I do, Andrea. I will just hold them all up at once. That will be easier for me. Here I have 4 designs I'd like to show you. And there are, I don't think any of them are difficult, and everybody will be able to knit them. I've never heard of anybody who have given up. And you're always welcome to contact me, and I'll help you all the way. But of course, there are some that are a bit easier to knit than others. You could, for a start, choose one of the designs that have just 2 colors in work at the same time. And then I have, for an example, the rain clouds, we call it here. That's Kerstin Olsson's designs. And you never knit with more than 2 colors at the same time. It has 8 pattern colors. And you see it's the white main color. You don't have to be afraid of using a white main color because it's dirt repellent and it's very strong, and it's no problem to wash it. You wash it as you do with any woolen garment, and it's quite easy actually, and it dries up in just 24 hours. But you won't need to do it very often. I seldom do. And this is another example of one of the easier ones with just 2 colors in all rows. There might be 1 or 2 rows with 3 colors at the same time. The greenwood, this one is called. And then you have some. Here I show you 2 of the most difficult designs. I have been talking about the wild apple earlier on. This one has 13 pattern colors, so you have very many colors. And some rows there are 4 pattern colors in work at the same row, and many rows with 3 colors at a time. So that's a challenge for those who wants to have a bit more.
Yes, that's one that I'd like to tackle.
Yes, and I will also tell about this one. That's rådjursbordet, and that's difficult in a different way, because here you have little tracks, the deer tracks up here, and you will have little balls of yarns to use. So you have to have patience when you do that one, because it does the yarn does not go around like that.
And just for the viewers who are watching the models around you, what have you got to your right there on the model? What's that one called?
This one is called the blue edge. And this is in pure wool, 100% wool. Anna-Lisa Mannheimer Lund's design. And then we have Randigaloppan. That is Emma Jacobsen, and just 2 colors. And this is one of the very early designs, and there are no pearl stitches in this one. The very early designs, there were just plain stockinette, and then later on they started with pearl knits to get an extra texture in the designs. And then the one I'm wearing is the blue shimmer. The most popular was the one on the light blue main color. And this one is a darker main color, which was also an original design. And this one is in, when you talk about how difficult they are, somewhere in between the easiest and the hardest. So some rows with 3 colors at the same time.
Okay, and the one to your left up on the mannequin, what's that one?
These one are 2 different variants of the flower bed, also Anna-Lisa Mannheimer designs from early 40s. And you have it with whole pattern fronts, 1 colored sleeves and 1 colored on the back. They are knitted from down and upwards. And the other one with a straight yoke.
They're very, very beautiful.
And they had both hats and mittens and gloves and so on.
Well, they're totally beautiful garments around you, so I'm sure the viewers have just been feasting on them the whole time you've been talking. Just one last question. What do you see as the future of Bohus Stickning? And so in your opinion, what's important to keep it alive and well in the future?
Well, I think it is important to keep it alive. And to do so, it is very important that we keep knitting these beautiful garments and the recreations. And I would just like to say also that it is of most important to me that always to dye the colors as exact as possible, and I will never offer kits that are not exactly as the originals. I nearly every day get questions if it's possible to change this color to another color or have this design with a different main color, and I will not. I will be authentic. I will honor Bohus Stickning and want it to be as they were, as authentic as it were. So I will continue my work, and I will be happy to be able to recreate more designs. There were so many. It's just a very, very little part of all that were from that time that has been recreated. But to do so, we need materials. We need the samples of yarns and the patterns and garments. So I would like to also, once again, if you have something in your private collection, please don't throw it away. This is a heritage from Bohuslän, and it is so huge all over the world, because it's more than just in Sweden that this has become a heritage. You have histories of Bohus Stickning in the United States. This was enormous, and there are so many garments in private collections, and to be able to for always remember this, we must use them, we must speak about them, we must wear them, we must knit them. So that's of great importance, and I hope that I'll be able to continue my work and provide kits for many, many years for knitters to knit and enjoy. And so I hope that you will give it a try, that you will enjoy all the beautiful patterns and also the history and the story about it then and now, and wear it and be proud and be able to pass this on to new generations for them to wear and see and enjoy. So thank you very much, Andrea, for letting me be on this show. It's been a great pleasure.
Well, it's been a real privilege to have you on the show, and it's been fascinating to hear the history of Bohus Stickning, to see the completely stunning designs and the dedication and attention to detail and the authenticity that's gone on through the original designers and then Solveig and then yourself. It's all been really fascinating to see, and it's also been really interesting to hear about the Angora rabbits. I didn't know much about that, and I know the viewers will really appreciate learning more about that as well. So it's been fantastic to have you on the show. Thank you so much, Pernilla.